All right. We are 1 minute past. So people will still trickle in, and then we have a great population of people that are in many different time zones. So they probably watch on the replay a lot more often. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. I am so excited to be back for another practitioner series April session. We've got Tyler Weeks with us, and I am very excited to talk to you. Welcome today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
For sure. I usually let people do their own introduction of themselves because you can introduce yourself better than you can. I can speak volumes about you, but I would love for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then as people are trickling in, we'll dive into the good questions.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I'll try to make this quick so we can get to the meat of the topic. But Tyler Weeks, I lead our talent analytics organization here at Marriott. I'm a bit of a sort of journeyman, I guess. My career started as a physicist, so I did R&D for Intel, and kind of got this itch to solve quote unquote business problems at some point, and I had no idea what that meant, and that landed me in TA. And that sort of started my whole HR journey nearly 10 years ago now. And I've been here ever since. I just have kind of fallen in love with this space. So you all are working on what I think is one of the coolest problems out there.
It is a pretty cool problem to work on. Now, I know in your intro, it said you haven't touched a laser in years. Most recruiters can't claim that ever in their life. So I'm
Yeah,
just going to say that's pretty phenomenal.
I used to spend my days taking apart microscopes and rebuilding them to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, we studied cancer and heart disease and stem cells and you name it, we were trying to take pictures of it. Yeah, now I get to talk to recruiters and HR folks and business leaders, and I don't know, it feels like I'm kind of doing all the same stuff, just different subject.
Just different subject.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here because you're going to teach us all about diving into the data analytics. Everyone, Sarah from ATAP is not here today to help with my background stuff, so I don't know if the chat is enabled properly. I believe the Q&A is, so if you have any comments, even if it's not a question, you may want to use the Q&A portion. We will save time at the end to go through all of that. But let's dive into it and start talking about TA analytics. Oh, Savannah says chat is working. Thank you, Savannah. Savannah's my wonderful friend who keeps me on track with all of the background things. So thank you, Savannah. We're good to go. So chat or Q&A function is good. All right. So since you've been in TA, since you moved away from the lasers, talk to us about your journey, because you've done a little bit of everything with Fortune 500 companies, with startups. Every tech out there is what you told me in our prep call. So talk to us about your journey with recruitment specifically.
Yeah, happy to. So, it's interesting. I really didn't know what I was getting into when I stepped into HR. And honestly, I was pretty convinced it was probably the worst decision of my life, because the only thing I knew about HR was Toby from The Office. And I was just like, okay, this could be like a terrible, terrible mistake. But I stepped into a role where it was kind of like a little bit of baptism by fire into the TA world, building and leading some recruitment strategies for our manufacturing division at Intel, which had me kind of deep into the guts of how we were going to find diverse talent for our technicians and our engineers all over the world, everywhere from Malaysia to Israel to Gilbert, Arizona. So, and I spent about a year doing that and came out the other side and was just a little bit like confused at why we were a technology company and all of that was like in Excel pivot tables. So like, it just seemed like there was a big opportunity to do something a little more meaningful. So I stepped into a very small little analytics team that we had, or reporting team that we had, and helped take that team from, report monkeys, just, you would sort of give us what you wanted and we give you back an Excel file, to when I left, we did analytics and automation. We brought in the first AI for recruiting. We built a whole suite of forecasts and scenario planning tools for talent leadership, and really kind of elevated the way they thought about the data they had and how we took advantage of it. And it was a ton of fun. And that I then spent a short amount of time leading HR data science there. And then in the middle of the pandemic, like everybody else, I had a existential crisis about what I was doing with my life, and stepped out and joined a startup. And that was a ton of fun. So Hired Score, some of you may have heard of them. They're an AI for recruiting, and really kind of unique in that they provide all the documentation like the OFCCP would need to see for every match they do. So like really kind of a cool technology. But that gave me exposure to a lot of large enterprise HR and TA teams. So I spent about a year and a half talking to every team I could get in front of about what they were doing, what problems they were trying to solve, what their challenges were. And at the same time, I was spending a lot of my time with the other technologies in our space around, like, because I was trying to kind of solve the problem of how we kind of stitch all of these together to really make the right solution for TA. So just spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people, and probably collecting more questions than answers. And then, yeah, last summer, got the opportunity to come and join Marriott. Wasn't expecting to come back to the enterprise. I was kind of really loving the startup world, but very excited to be here, and kind of back into building. And yeah, we've had some success already, which is great. So,
That's fantastic.
yeah.
So we're going to do something different today for people who have been here before. I've embedded a couple of polls throughout for everyone to listen to. So the first one, first and foremost, we're going to find out about how much people love analytics. That's what we're here to talk about today. So I've dropped it into the chat, or however it pops up for you, and I will share the results shortly. So before we launch fully into analytics, you told me something really fascinating during our prep session. I know we're not here to just talk about Marriott today, but I think it blew my mind when you shared this with me, and I can't possibly be the only one. Well, it's possible. It's possible I could be the only one, but I think it's really interesting, the impact of your employees, the sheer vast number of employees that work for Marriott, and how natural events have a greater impact on your employees than most of us would consider. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, like I said, I was really loving where I was. So it had to be a very cool problem. Again, that sort of like researcher, scientist in me is still very strong. The thing I love most is a really hard problem, and one that has impact, right? Like I really want to do something cool with this in this domain. What really piqued my interest about Marriott was kind of actually two things. One that we didn't really talk about in our pre-discussion, but there's a really dynamic leadership team in HR here, that's really exciting to work for. Just really focused on innovation and really obsessed with how to make life better for our associates, our employees. So that was a big draw, but also just the sheer footprint of Marriott was a little bit staggering and tantalizing. So we're coming up on about 400,000 Marriott associates worldwide. We're the largest hospitality company, I think, by almost 2x than our nearest competitor. If you add in our franchise business, which is the majority of our business, we're going to cross, I think, the 1 million person mark in the next couple of years of people wearing a Marriott badge. So that's enormous.
That's enormous.
And I've heard, I've not been able to verify it, but I'm still going to repeat it because I love, I like it. It actually, like, it helps put, so when hurricane, maybe 100 years ago, when a Hurricane Katrina happened, right? I remember my mom coming to me and she's like, Tyler, this thing was huge. And I was like, well, yeah, I know. I've been watching the news. She's like, no, but there were 1,200 Walmarts closed. And like, that was the thing that, like, for my mom, like,
That was the standout
put
thing.
it all in the scale, where I was like 1,200 Walmarts. So one of the equivalents for me here at Marriott is that if you were to take just our restaurant business, I mean, think about all the servers, bartenders, cooks, chefs that we hire worldwide. We would be, if you took just that, we'd be the 4th largest restaurant in the world, from a talent
Wow.
perspective. So we're huge. And what's crazy is that there's not a world event that doesn't involve a Marriott, right? We had a hotel in the World Trade Center. I have hotel, like every earthquake, just about every, like anywhere there's political unrest, any world event you can think of, we probably have associates there. And so, the challenge of understanding what it's like to work for us, if we can solve that, we're actually sort of understanding the world, which is really kind of puts it into a place that, got me excited and really drew me into working here in this and on this team. So yeah, it's a big challenge. We've got a lot ahead of us, and a lot of fun problems to solve between here and the equivalent of colonizing Mars, because it's a big problem.
I love that. I'm glad you shared that. I couldn't let you escape today without sharing that with everyone, because sometimes it's hard to think about it on such a vast scale, but I imagine that a lot of us don't work on that level. So I'm going to click back over into the poll. Thank you for everyone who answered. So 81% of people said they do love it, and 19% said they do not. And that is okay, because this is still a session
I love
for everyone. And that's what my next
whoever the 19%
we're going to get them excited.
This one, I love that. That's my favorite thing all day.
Perfect. So that is okay. There might be some people on this call who adore it. There may be some who like it but don't really know where to start. And there may be some who kind of roll their eyes at it and don't love it. That's okay. We've got something for everyone today. What are talent acquisition analytics? Let's start really simple. Let's make sure everyone's got a good understanding of where we're at. What are they and why are they important?
Look, one of the best parts about my job is nobody knows what analytics is. They just know they want some. So like, you kind of just do whatever you want. No, in reality, there are the way I think about it is the difference between reporting, which is just sort of giving you what happened, right? Here are the number of people that got hired. Are the number of recs that are open right now. That is giving you just the facts, right? But that doesn't tell you anything about the experience. So the metaphor that I use often, and I apologize ahead of time for the sports metaphor. I know LinkedIn says I'm not supposed to do that, but I think it's appropriate, and I think it'll make sense here. If you were to take any sport and that's got 2 teams out on a field or a court, and you were to ask people sitting in the stands the details of the game, they would all give you the same facts, but they would all talk about depending on what color they wore that day, they would talk about different games. So whether or not they said they won, that depends on who they were rooting for. Whether or not it was a great game or the refs were amazing depends on who they were rooting for. The score, how long it took, how many fouls there were, that's completely objective. There's no room to interpret did they actually score 7 goals or not, right? Like there were 7 goals scored, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. Now that is that's the analytics. So in this talent space, really where I have my team and what we're trying to do is equip people to understand what it was like, what happened. Was the way this rec was filled, was that a success or was that a failure? Well, it kind of all depends. Like, if you're the candidate, it depends on whether or not you got the job, right? Like, and so, yeah, I think there's much more really kind of, and I know this is like not like a practical answer in the sense that like, and we'll get to, I think, some of that as we get to other questions, but I really focus on kind of a sense of empathy with my team, which probably sounds weird. Like, you're probably expecting like robot analytics guy, but we really focus on the story. We really focus on who is it that we're talking about and what could this mean? Like, even numbers that seem simple or like obvious, like turnover or attrition. Well, I've had lots of jobs and I loved most of them, but I'm here now. So even interpreting turnover as a bad experience or a negative thing isn't right. So there's a lot of art that goes, I think, into turning something from a report into an analysis.
I agree. I'm plagiarizing. I'm going to steal your words and put it in the chat because I thought the post you did for today's event was so wonderful. You said, seeing the human experience in a sea of transactional data requires more empathy than linear algebra. And I loved that quote. I thought it was so great. So if people didn't see your post, I wanted to make sure we put it here because I thought that was a powerful way to look at it. Okay. If people saw in the preview, I'm going to launch the next poll because Tyler has some pretty great acronyms. QoH and TTF. What the TTF is QoH. Let's see what people are going to vote on. Do you know what these are? Because I know they're pretty funny, and then we'll let Tyler jump into them before we start talking about them. So 64% are saying yes, they know. 72% say yes, they know. All right.
Points
There
if
we go.
you think they mean is wildly work inappropriate.
Possible. All right. So let's talk about those. What are each of those? Let's start with QoH.
Look, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with recruiters and, you know, recruiting teams and teams building KPIs and analytics for recruiting, and quality of hire is one that I see come up, or QoH come up a lot, right? It's one that I've seen used as a KPI to measure the success of individual recruiters or recruiting teams, of recruiting technology, of, I mean, you name it, it kind of gets pulled in as a kind of like offer accept rate, right? Like, though everyone wants to like derive all sorts of meaning out of those things. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with quality of hire. And part of the reason is the way it's measured typically doesn't really tell you anything about the quality of the hire. So it drives me crazy, right? So the typical way is like, if your organization is looking at it, what they're probably measuring is their attrition and performance. Those are sort of the two main drivers for quality of hire usually. So for attrition, they look at, they'll pick a time, like usually it's about a year, and they'll say, did the person stay for a year or 6 months or whatever the benchmark is for your company? And then they'll send surveys to the manager like at intervals sometimes, and ask, how is this person doing? So that's one way that they'll get to the performance piece. Like, are they, performing well in their role? And then the third thing they'll do is also maybe look at their performance after the first year, like their performance review, if your company has a robust annual performance process. That's it. That's really the main measurements that go into that. Now, here's the problem. What the hell does any of that have to do with the recruiter? Right? Like, really, I mean, given those things that they're measuring, if I could rename it, I would call it quality of manager, right? Like that manager is spending all that time, and you know, the onboarding process and how quickly they got their laptop and how well they integrated with the team and how much of a micromanager they have. Like all of those things kind of go into somebody's performance in the first year, their likelihood of staying. You could have hired the best software developer on planet Earth, but if they don't get along with their manager, they're out of there. Does that mean it was a bad hire? I don't know. Like, so I just don't like, to me, there's a pretty wild disconnect between what we call it and what it's actually telling us. So I really try to steer teams away from quality of hire being a TA KPI, or having TA leaders sign up for quality of hire being a thing that they are going to drive, unless they also own the full end-to-end onboarding process. Because if they own onboarding, then sure, but that is probably closer to the onboarding part of their purview than the sourcing and recruiting part of their purview.
For sure. I'm going to launch the next poll because I'm very curious what people have to say. And I know you and I have some thoughts on this. So when does everyone think that quality of hire transfers from recruitment to management at time of hire, on the start date, or within 30 to 60, 90 days? I know I've worked at many different places, and sometimes it's as soon as the manager takes over. Like you said, the managers are ordering the equipment and they're making sure IT gives you access to the necessary folders, setting up your emails. So it should shift to them. I've also been raked over the coals after 3 months when an employee didn't work out, to say, well, Christy, you should have known this. How on earth could I not know? How could you not know that they wouldn't integrate into our team? So I'm pretty confident all of us have worked in a variety of organizations, same as I have. So I'm curious to see what people are saying. Right now, we're at 35% at time of hire, 56% on start date, and 11% within 30, 60, 90 days. So that is very interesting. I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes, but talk to us about why you don't think it should lie with recruiters, and in your experience, what you've seen of when that transfers.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when I talk to recruiters, because I love the opportunity to sort of talk to folks in the front lines, and sort of one of the questions I always like to ask is, why do you do this? Like, what, like managers, will rake you through the coals, like I just like the eternal punching bags for kind of like everybody, like even HR just kind of likes to like punch down at TA for some reason. I don't get it. It's like the weirdest thing. But so when I'm always kind of curious, like, so, but why? Like, why? So why would you sign up for that? And to the person, every recruiter I've ever talked to starts to tell me a story about like some person that they tried because this was the opportunity that changed their life, and they talk about it the way that like delivery nurses talk about their job. It's like you're part of, or like real estate agents will do the same thing. Like you're part of like a significant life event. It's almost like you're a bunch of career doulas. And like, that's like really, that to me, like if I were to think about what is a quality hire, there's a thing there where it's like it had the biggest impact on both the person and the organization. And so I think as a recruiter, finding those killer candidates that the manager's going to get excited about, that it also is very meaningful to that candidate, that's your quality. That's like the quality candidate, right? That's the one that we sort of, everyone wants to find, like the golden candidate. And then beyond that, what their onboarding experience was, I saw someone in the chat say, like at offer, I agree. Like once you get to offer, then it is, and my purview now is all HR. So I am worried about onboarding, and I am worried about integration and ramp time, and how do we maximize productivity with new hires. But now you're getting into sort of like what the rest of HR should be doing, right? So, so yeah, I don't know if they answered your question, but to me, that when I think about that piece of what a recruiter does and what makes a recruiter powerful, that's the piece that I think I always want to index on heavily.
Okay, perfect. Let's shift to TTF. What is that? And you also talked to me about managers and recruiters starting the clock at different times. So I'll put two questions together. What is it? And why do we start the clock on different intervals?
Time to fill. Ugh, yeah, this one's fun. Yeah, this is another one that many recruiting teams use. It's often built into the SLAs of like an RPO or an agency contract, and it's pretty ubiquitous. What's interesting is how many different definitions of fill there are, right? For some people, the clock starts as soon as the rec is opened, and it ends when somebody is in a seat at the company. For some folks, it's when the rec actually gets posted, external, like advertised, and it ends when somebody accepts an offer. Like there's all these different iterations of what that, when you start the stopwatch and when you end the stopwatch. To me, if anybody is using, I would like strongly discourage anyone from using time to sit in a seat. And the reason is because it drives, I think, some negative behavior with candidates, or sort of disincentivizes you to look at candidates that need 2 months to start. Like, who cares, right? Like, they accepted the offer, they're excited to work there. Maybe they've got a role they need to, like, if they're really conscientious and they're trying to like leave their team gracefully, they may need to button up some work before they can exit. Or more practically, maybe they're a college student and they don't graduate for 6 months, and you're part of a university team at a career fair. Like, like somehow you're being measured to how long it took to fill your roles. Like, why not? Why wait until next June to get credit for the amazing work that recruiter was doing on campus? So really, I think time to, like, when they accept the offer, that's the right time to hit the stopwatch. But what time to fill also sort of varies is it's very focused on one person, on the person who got the job. If you kind of step back from the problem and you look at all the people involved, there's actually a few different stopwatches happening as soon as a rec gets open. There's the manager, and the manager has a perspective, which I'm sure if you're recruiters, you've all dealt with, where they submitted the rec and then 3 hours later, they send you an email and they're like, hey, where's my candidates? Right? They're sort of like, they've got a few touch points that they're really paying attention to. They want to know when they're going to see their first slate. That's a really important one for them, because they want to know for some reason, they don't care about the second one, but that first one, they want to know that you're working, right? They want to know how quickly they can, from the time that they open the rec to that they're going to have a person who's actively working on their team. They do want to know that. They want to know how long it's going to take. And depending on the type of hire they're doing, it could vary. But, if they need somebody in 3 weeks, but it always takes about a quarter, then, that's a thing that, as opposed to a KPI, I think is really important to have in your back pocket as a recruiter, to set expectations. And I think a lot of experienced recruiters will sort of walk in with that as sort of a expectation setting number, right? Hey, just so you know, this takes about a quarter and a half to fill this type of role. So that's what we're working with. But get that number for the types of role you fill in your organization. It's a thing that you can walk in and you'll look smart in every meeting because you've got it. And one little pro tip, add a decimal point, then it looks really official. Don't say 90 days, be like 92.3 days, and everyone be like, oh damn, that's like a real number.
That's a real number. You You can't avoid the decimal
Could-
point. That's funny.
Couldn't have possibly made that one up.
No.
So, but there's another experience there that really gets hidden when you just focus on that, and that's of the candidates. So, I actually introduced a new KPI when I was at Intel that we called time to respond. Because what we found is that for the candidate that got the job, time for that candidate experience, for the person who got the job, it was something like 45 days from the time they applied, not when the rec was open, from the time they applied to the time they accepted their offer, right? So, but for the person who didn't get the job, the average was like 55 days or 60 days or something like that. It was much longer to hear back. And that's because you all do this. I know you all do, so don't deny it. You kind of hang on to all those candidates in case they reject the offer and you don't want to have to go back and source or repost. And so you kind of hoard all of them until the very last minute, and then they get auto dispositioned, or maybe you have a process where you have to go disposition them, but it happens well after, it happens after the person who got the job found out. So we instituted a KPI that was time to respond. And the only two flags that we had in our system that let us know for sure somebody talked to you was either you were scheduled for an interview, because someone had to talk to you to do that, or you received a disposition notice. And so it wasn't perfect, but we could say, okay, we know that somebody talked to you at that point. And then we really pushed heavy on that one, because what we didn't want to do is just be like brokers for disappointment, right? Like have like one Charlie bucket and then everybody else gets flushed up the chocolate tube. So, yeah, I those time metrics can be really powerful, but again, just think about the person who's going through that experience, and you might have the wrong one. That's where they can be powerful analytics if you can kind of step into those shoes.
For sure. You are segueing into my next question quite perfectly. What KPIs should we be focusing on? And most importantly, you talked to me about quality of slate and using segments of pivotal decisions. So talk to everyone about that.
Yeah, happy to. Look, there's no real good secret here. I'm not going to tell you anything that you probably, it's going to like blow your minds. You're going to be like, whoa, I never. Ratios and times. That's really what it comes down to. Ratios are sort of the like conversion ratios or conversion rates are the best metric you have for quality. They're the simplest ones. How many people did I put forward in the first slate? What percent of those made it to interview? The goal should be 100%. You'll never get there, but like ideally every person you put through is somebody they would want to hire. Like, why would you give them anybody that you wouldn't expect they want to hire? And looking at the percent of people that go from interview to offer, again, probably not 100% because they're only going to hire, usually one, but there should, if you did, like if you gave the first slate and a really quality first slate and you've got their confidence, you should be able to give the smallest slate possible, have everybody convert to interview, and in the first have your hire come from the first slate. So looking at what percent of the time the offer, not how many people went from interview to offer, but what percent of the time the offer went to somebody from the first slate, tells you a lot about kind of the quality of the work that a recruiter is doing. That to me is way more powerful than quality of hire, actually. And actually even more interesting than offer accept. Everyone loves offer accept ratios, but to me, it's one of the least interesting because it never changes. Like if it's like 86 right now, it's going to be 86 for like forever. And it's also one of the easier ones for, recruiters to game, because I know you guys all like give offers and then find out like if they're really going to accept, and then you log the offer. We know your games. So like but those conversion ratios are powerful. Whatever ones you have, those are good for telling a story about quality of work, about quality of candidates, and time. Like the time that those rate ones, those are really good for talking about experience. So
Mhm.
ratios tell you about quality of work, rates or time through tells you about the quality of experience. It doesn't tell the full picture. There's lots of things you'll miss. There's lots of things you'll get wrong. But just as a rule of thumb, when you see those, that's what you should be talking about.
I think
So
that's such an important one for us to focus on too, because you said it a few minutes ago, recruiters are usually the punching bags for everything. And there's so many things that we cannot control in this business. We're working with humans. Our product is humans. That sounds very weird to say, but our products are humans. And things happen, things change. We don't know their true intentions. Counter offers happen as much as we wish they didn't. So I think focusing on how many submissions you're getting through to interview is a way better tracking ratio. My team had a great win this week. We submitted one candidate to one job. They went to interview one, interview two, and offer within a week. That's the beauty. That's the magic right there. You want that to happen. You want it to be one candidate, because then that means that the ratio is exceptional. If you're submitting 45 candidates and getting one person hired, sure, we can congratulate you on your time to fill and getting that success, but it also means you submitted 44 people that didn't make it through. So I definitely encourage people to focus on some different metrics as well. We talked about the time to reject. How can people, one of the things you talked about in our prep call as well is that sometimes it can be hard to gather this data if you haven't been trained to do it. So how would you encourage people on this call? We're here to learn all together. How do you encourage people to start gathering data if they don't know the first place to start?
yeah, this one can be tough. It depends on the ATS you're using. Like some ATSs make this really easy for you. Some make it really hard. Some of you will have one person who sort of does analytics or reporting part-time. And so like getting anything from them or getting like is really kind of hard. I've known recruiters that they do, actually a lot of recruiters this way. Is a little aside. When you talk to like TA tech companies, they're all fighting for like owning the recruiter experience. But like if you talk to recruiters about what tools they're using most during the day, they almost all have Excel trackers that they've built. They all have like some sort of like Outlook or like folder systems, because you know you got to do a little CYA, because when the manager says you never sent me candidates, you got to pull that email out and be like, hey, I sent you candidates.
Mhm.
And then they're in LinkedIn all the time. Those are all Microsoft. So like
Right.
but those the reason I said those Excel trackers, if you've got nothing else, if there's no analytics team you can go to, if it's not obvious from your ATS how to pull out some numbers, even just doing, and you don't need, here's the beauty of statistics, you don't need every single rec. But if you were to just sort of like take and look at your recs as you're going through and like how many people you put forward, how many people, and start tracking it a little bit on your own in Excel and just have a soft number. It doesn't have to be, just knowing, hey, when I like even being able to say to a manager, you know, typically I'll provide you about 4 candidates. What I've seen with managers like you or people in your organization is that 2 or 3 of them are you typically find good for interview. So we're going to start with 4, and that should get you enough to get started. Like that can help kind of frame an expectation without having really robust analytics. And then for the time ones, I'd kind of do the same thing. Just like some of that could be in your email where you have like timestamps on the emails. You go, okay, well, like how quickly am I getting this? And don't worry about measuring them all. Get 4 or 5 recs, and then you kind of get a ballpark number there. And you know, rules of thumb rule the world. So just make sure you got like a few rules of thumb of like how long it kind of takes. Just getting there is a great place to start, honestly.
Perfect.
So
I'm going to launch our last poll here, in your opinion, is your organization focusing on the right analytics? And I put that in quotation. Something that's coming up a lot, Tyler, in a lot of these sessions. This is our fourth one in this new series for 2023, but no matter what the topic is, it's coming up often that organizations are focusing on archaic metrics. So how can people on this call or people watching the replay later, how can they go back to their organizations and champion change to shift the needle towards focusing on different metrics instead of just the time to fill or quality of hire? How can you encourage people to become bold and champion change?
Yeah, actually, there's a question in the chat also about placement numbers, and I would just sort of bundle that in there. Looks like Savannah asked. Look, I think as a recruiter, you can kind of as a recruiter, you can kind of play a little bit of an inception game, which is probably your best. I mean, like, first of all, obviously talking to your leaders, right? Like helping them understand how you, like, telling them the story of like, hey, here we're seeing managers be really satisfied, or I'm getting a lot of good feedback by doing X. That story, because I guarantee you your leadership is just as worried about happy hiring managers as you are, right? Like just a lot of like stakeholder management. So if you go to them with not, hey, you've got the wrong metrics, but with, hey, when I do this, or when this happens, seems like my hiring managers are much happier. That's a thing that will get any leader's attention, or at least a leader that cares, right? So like, I would really frame it as a positive. Here's how we make their experience better with not that much more effort from me. The other thing is tell your managers, like say, hey, I'm doing this because it's going to get you this. The second they go to their manager, or somebody says, hey, my recruiter, blah, and they're like, well, my recruiter does X, that does circulate back to your leaders. So like, if they like think that that's part of the thing that you should be delivering, and they start telling your leaders like, hey, we need the thing that Krista's doing, it'll magically become like a thing you get measured against, if that makes sense. So use your hiring managers to influence your leaders. They're really kind of ultimately the customers there. So yeah.
I like that. Wonderful. All right, so let's look at some of the questions that came in. I do want to note that 71% of people voted no, their organizations are not using the right metrics. So very interesting. I think this is something that is big for us to all learn together, because obviously there's room for improvement there. So you already answered Savannah's first one, or her second one, but Savannah also asked, how can recruiters start the conversation? Oh, nope, that was the same one. Sorry, Savannah, we did both at the same time.
Well, I will say, just on Savannah's first question about placement, that's not, we talked about quality of hire and time to fill. Placement is also a really interesting one. I think a lot of these metrics, the history of them is because they are the SLAs that are built into contracts most often with external recruiting services, so RPOs and agencies. It's how they kind of hold, your company is probably paying per hire. Or if you work at an agency, you're as a recruiter probably getting comped per hire. But those metrics don't really translate well when you're in-house at an enterprise, because like you're not getting paid per hire. So it's kind of a weird thing. Like, why are you like measuring how many people I hired this year? That one is a tough one if your org is doing that. I also, I don't totally like, I think in an ideal world, I haven't solved this problem. So like, I'm saying this kind of speculatively, it should be normalized to the difficulty of the roles that you're supporting. So if your organization is sort of peanut buttering and saying every recruiter should fill, 100 positions a year, well, that might be true if you're doing, interns and, entry level roles. But if you're doing senior engineers, technical roles, if you have a focus on like strategic, harder to fill roles, that might be wildly ridiculous. It could be if you're doing like hourly roles, 100 could be way too low. So I do think that you'll never probably get away from fills, because like everybody's got some sort of metric of like output in every role, that you're never going to get away from that. But what I would focus on is it the right benchmark for the roles that you're filling? And that's probably the best you can do, just to be totally real about it. So sorry.
Perfect. All right, next question is, what time frame is reasonable to allow a candidate to provide their offer decision? Some have asked for a week, which leaves me torn. They're clearly awaiting another decision, but I also don't want to push them away and forcing a decision to be made. This also isn't fair to other candidates. That is an amazing question, because that is tricky when you want to give people time to think about it, for sure, and we don't want to push them. But how long is too long?
Woo, how long's a rope? That's oh God, that's probably a whole podcast. That's probably a whole interview right there. I would say that there's different, I think beyond just like sourcers and recruiters and coordinators, within kind of the recruiter world, there's also different types of recruiters. I think there's recruiters who their superpower is sort of the attraction. Like, you get in, you get people interested in the role, interested in the company, you sort of piquing their interest. And then there's others that their superpower is they're the closer, right? They can get people to that offer, and to the yes or no, like relatively quickly. There's very few that I think that are really good at both. That's kind of the exception. And I think most people seem to kind of know like where their strength is.
Yeah.
This is one that is sort of like a lot of intuition is built into that, because it's going to be very specific to that candidate. Like, are you applying like a bit more of a high pressure situation where you're like, hey, I need a decision now, because you kind of sense that that's going to help them make the decision? Or is this somebody that's definitely more thoughtful or plotting, and if you push them, they're just going to default to no because they don't want to be like? That's so specific to those candidates. But I do think this isn't an analytics question, but like I do think that like finding the people whose superpower is the close and just consulting with them, that's probably your best bet, is like how to feel that out. And it's not really going to be, there's not really going to be like a number that I can give you that's going to solve that one. So
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a tough one for sure. And I think a lot rides on it. If you're asking them to relocate, if they are one of the few in the United States who do that type of job, it might be difficult for them to give you a quick yes. They may need to talk to their spouse. I think there's a lot of variables in getting a yes. So that's a great question. Next question. Tell us about your favorite ATS regarding analytics. Which one do you feel like makes it easier to show the right metrics? You've worked with a lot of them, so that's a tough question.
That is a tough question. Look, ATS is, this could be a whole conversation. Like I've got some opinions. One of the funniest things to me in the ATS world is that every recruiter hates Taleo until they don't have Taleo. And then they're like, oh God, Taleo was amazing.
I'm not there yet. I still hate it.
I do feel like the transition to Workday was very painful, but the way the analytics was structured in there was pretty easy for my team and I to provide some metrics back for the teams. Some of the ATSs that are not necessarily enterprise. So like if you're at a large enterprise, you're probably on Oracle, SAP, or Workday. right? Like that's kind of, those are kind of the ones available. Workday is probably the easiest from a end user standpoint. Like you can get to the analytics, or you've got access, and it's kind of, you know, modern looking. Oracle is probably the more powerful in terms of like total potential, but using Oracle, buying Oracle is kind of like buying C++, right? Like it's like it can do everything if you know how to do it. And so you really do need a team like mine to sort of be building things to make it easy for you. Like it's not going to be naturally easy, but you can do some very powerful things with it. SAP, that one seems to kind of overall struggle the most for the ATS itself. If you have business objects or some of like the analytics components that SAP provides, and your IT has set it up to make it easy to made that connection or that integration robust, then that one can be great too. A lot of it kind of depends on the quality of like your ops, your TA ops and IT teams that are supporting you, and kind of how they've configured and built it, because all three of them are very configurable. If you go below that tier and you get into like the smart recruiters, the iSIMs, oh, my brain just went totally blank. Green,
Bullhorn.
yes.
My
You kind
brain
of
was
like
blank too,
yeah,
apparently.
if you kind of go down to that next tier, some of them actually have probably the easiest to access and easiest to use for the recruiter, but they're because they're more built for recruiters. They're not really built for the enterprise. But you're much less likely to have those if you're at a large enterprise. But you know, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd give recruiters kind of that. But so
we'll hope you can invent that magic wand for us one day. All right, this is another great question that just came in. Not all recs are created equal. Do you have any insight on what those standard ratios should be for sales to technical to executive searches, etc.?
100%. Every candidate you put forward should get hired. Well, it's tough. I mean, it's not just by discipline, but it's also, some of this is tied to the strength of your employer brand, right? So like, think about it from a candidate's perspective. Like I'll give you a good example at Intel. This is a few years ago. I think they've spun it out since then, but they had a division or a subsidiary called Mobileye, which was a technology for self-driving cars. Very successful technology. Nobody thought of Intel as being in the auto industry. So going and getting people to want to come work for us was hard, not because we didn't have great technology, not because we didn't have a great team, but like they're thinking Tesla, they're thinking Volkswagen, they're thinking, you know, like even Google had a, like, you know, they had bought, they'd purchased an autonomous, they had a little bit more of like a footprint in the space. So if you think about the candidate who's going to their peers and going, hey, I got a job offer from Tesla, they don't have to offer any more explanation to their peers about why that's a good choice. It's obvious. They're like, oh yeah, Tesla, we know that one. We all do autos, and we know that's an automobile company that probably is working on self-driving cars. So like, the case makes itself. If I get an offer from a company that doesn't, like, I don't know, maybe Nabisco is working on like autonomous vehicles, and I've got to go explain to my friends, no, actually they've got like an autonomous vehicle division, and now it's me as the candidate, the burden's on me to explain to all my friends and family why that's a good choice. And that burden is often kind of one of the things that I think impacts your ratios, right? So like how likely you are to get candidates to the next level, how like likely they are to kind of progress, it is impacted by that, and by geography, and by, you know, so again, that's tough to give you a number. I will say though, ambitiously, if you can focus on first slate to interview and making that 100%, that's probably the best. Like, let the rest of it take care of itself. But if you can get to a point where you would like every single candidate is a candidate that you think could get hired, that is kind of, I think, the ultimate goal. So I would say 100%. Sorry.
So I think I'm making notes on the additional talks we're going to have with you, because now we've got ATS as a whole other conversation. And I think employer branding needs to be a whole other conversation, because we've seen recently, you weren't talking about tech companies, but for so long, people were striving for those companies where they could say, oh, I got the job offer from Tesla. There's zero explanation needed, right? You've reached the nirvana of job offers. You take it, you run with it, you go, because of that name recognition. But sometimes that name recognition fails the person in the long run. So how do those other companies keep up? It's with employer branding. It's with creating your evangelist from the inside. It's that awareness of what you're doing is just as cool as Tesla. You're just not as well known as Tesla. So we'll add that to our list of things we'll talk about the next time.
As a side note, 99% of your employer brand is the products you sell. I think the biggest value employer branding can do is actually focus on equipping the candidate to talk to their dad.
I like that.
What does the candidate need to know to convince their roommate at college that this is the best job? Not convince them, they're already talking to you, but how do you equip them to talk to everyone else? Which is a little bit different problem. But
it is a little bit different. Well, thank you so much. We are right at the end here. Thanks to everyone who has joined us and people who are going to watch on the replay. We always come back the next week. It'll be next Thursday that we come back as a roundtable for everyone to share their thoughts and insights. I myself will not be present, so I've asked my lovely friend Savannah, another member of this ATAP committee, to take my place in hosting next week. My leadership team is going to Atlanta next week for some in-person strategy session. Tyler, I know you're in person and on site today. There's nothing beats being on site and in person sometimes. So I'm really excited for that. So I will miss you all next week, but Savannah is just much better host than I am for the roundtable. So everyone who's been here today, come on back and we'll talk all about it. I'll get her to record it so I can catch up on the conversation later. Thank you to everyone who came. I encourage you to follow Tyler. You can find him on LinkedIn. Are you the only Tyler Weeks on LinkedIn? Probably.
I'm the only one that looks like this. So
looks like this. Perfect. Savannah usually grabs a picture for us as well, if you're okay with that. Everyone else, thank you so much. It was lovely to have you all here. I hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you again next time.
Great. Thanks you all. Bye.
All right, Savannah, we are ready when you are. Hang on, I have to scratch my eye. I'm not ready. I lied. I've been holding that itch in for 40 minutes. All right, Savannah, ready when you are. We'll just hold the awkward smile for a minute. She probably got it. All right. Thank you so much, Tyler. This was great.
Yeah.
We will put together some clips. Oh, she said she got it. Usually we release it. The full podcast will be, or webinar will be on the ATAP website. I don't know what the difference is. And then I'll put together some clips for if you want to share it as well. But I enjoyed this. This was great. Thanks so much.
It's a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.